before. Pod came in slowly, his sack on his back. He leaned his hat pin with its dangling name tape against the wall, and on the middle of the kitchen table he placed a doll's teacup. It was the size of a mixing bowl. "Why, Pod," began Homily. "Got the saucer too," he said. He swung down the sack and untied his neck. "Here you are," he said, drawing out the saucer. "Matches it." He had a round currant bunny sort of face. Tonight it looked flabby. "Oh, Pod," said Homily, "you do look queer. Are you all right?" Pod sat down. "I'm fair enough," he said. "You went up the curtain," said Homily. "Oh, Pod, you shouldn't have. It's shaken you." Pod made a strange face. His eyes swivelled round towards Arrietty. Homily stared at him, her mouth open, and then she turned. "Come along, Arrietty," she said briskly. "You pop off to bed now, like a good girl, and I'll bring you some supper." "Oh," said Arrietty, "can't I see the rest of the borrowings?" "Your father's got nothing now, only food. Off you pop to bed. You've seen the cup and saucer." Arrietty went into the sitting room to put away her diary and took some time fixing her candle on the upturned drawing pin which served as a holder. "Whatever are you doing?" grumbled Homily. "Give it here. There, that's the way. Now off to bed and fold your clothes, mind." "Good night, Papa," said Arrietty, kissing his flat white cheek. "Careful of the light," he said mechanically, and he watched her with his round eyes until she had closed the door. "Now, Pod," said Homily when they were alone, "tell me, what's the matter?" Pod looked at her blankly. "I've been seen," he said. Homily put out a groping hand for the edge of the table. She grasped it and lowered herself slowly onto the stool. "Oh, Pod," she said. There was a silence between them. Pod stared at Homily, and Homily stared at the table. After a while she raised her white face. "Badly?" she asked. Pod moved restlessly. "I don't know about badly. I've been seen. Ain't that bad enough?" "No one," said Homily slowly, "hasn't never been seen since Uncle Hendry, and he was the first, they say, for 45 years. A thought struck her, and she gripped the table. "It's no good, Pod. I won't emigrate." "No one's asked you to," said Pod. "To go and live like Hendry and Loopy in a badger set, the other side of the world, that's where they say it is, all among the earthworms. It's 2 fields away, above the spinney," said Pod. "Nuts, that's what they eat. And berries. I wouldn't wonder if they don't eat mice." "You've eaten mice yourself," Pod reminded her. "All draughts and fresh air, and the children growing up wild. Think of Arrietty," said Homily. "Think of the way she's been brought up. An only child. She'd catch her death. It's different for Hendry." "Why?" asked Pod. "He's got 5. "That's why," explained Homily. "When you've got 5, they're brought up rough. Never mind that now. Who saw you?" "A boy," said Pod. "A what?" exclaimed Homily, staring. "A boy." Pod sketched out a rough shape in the air with his hands. "You know, a boy." "But there isn't. I mean, what sort of boy?" "I don't know what you mean, what sort of a boy. A boy in a nightshirt. A boy. You know what a boy is, don't you?" "Yes," said Homily, "I know what a boy is. But there hasn't been a boy, not in this house, these 20 years. "Well," said Pod, "there's one here now." Homily stared at him in silence, and Pod met her eyes. "Where did he see you?" asked Homily at last. "In the schoolroom." "Oh," said Homily. "When you was getting the cup?" "Yes," said Pod. "Haven't you got eyes?" asked Homily. "Couldn't you have looked first?" "There's never nobody in the schoolroom, and what's more," he went on, "there wasn't today." "Then where was he?" "In bed, in the night nursery, or whatever it's called. That's where he was, sitting up in bed, with the doors open." "Well, you could have looked in the nursery." "How could I? Halfway up the curtain?" "Is that where you was?" "Yes." "With the cup?" "Yes. I couldn't get up or down." "Oh, Pod," wailed Homily, "I should never have let you go, not at your age." "Now look here," said Pod, "don't mistake me. I got up all right. Got up like a bird, as you might say, bobbles or no bobbles. But," he leaned towards her, "afterwards, with the cup in my hand, if you see what I mean. He picked it up off the table. You see, it's heavy like. You can hold it by the handle, like this, but it drops or droops, as you might say. You should take a cup like this in your two hands. A bit of cheese off a shelf or an apple. Well, I dropped that. Give it a push and it falls and I climbs down in my own time and picks it up. But with a cup. You see what I mean? And coming down, you got to watch your feet. And, as I say, some of the bobbles was missing. You didn't know what you could hold on to. Not safely. Oh, Pod, said Homily, her eyes full of tears. What did you do? Well, said Pod, sitting back again. He took the cup. What do you mean? Exclaimed Homily, aghast. Pod avoided her eyes. Well, he'd been sitting up in bed there, watching me. I'd been on that curtain a good 10 minutes because the hall clock had just struck the quarter. But how do you mean he took the cup? Well, he got out of bed and there he was standing there, looking up. Oh, gasped Homily, her eyes staring. And you give it him? He took it, said Pod, ever so gentle, and then when I was down, he give it me. Homily put her face in her hands. Now don't take on, said Pod uneasily. He might have caught you, shuddered Homily in a stifled voice. Yes, said Pod, but you just give me the cup. Here you are, he said. Homily raised her face. What are we going to do? She asked. Pod sighed. Well, there isn't nothing we can do, except... Oh, no, exclaimed Homily. Not that. Not emigrate. Not that. Pod, now I've got the house so nice and a clock and all. We could take the clock, said Pod. And Ariette, what about her? She's not like those cousins. She can read, Pod, and sew a treat. He don't know where we live, said Pod. But they look, exclaimed Homily. Remember Hendreary? They got the cat and... Now, said Pod. Don't bring up the past. But you've got to think of it. They got the cat and... Yes, said Pod, but Eglantine was different. How different? She was Ariette's age. Well, they hadn't told her, you see. That's where they went wrong. They tried to make her believe that there wasn't nothing but was under the floor. They never told her about Mrs. Driver or Crampfurl, least of all about cats. There wasn't any cat, Homily pointed out. Not till Hendreary was seen. Well, there was then, said Pod. You got to tell them, that's what I say, or they try to find out for themselves. Pod, said Homily solemnly, we haven't told Ariette. Oh, she knows, said Pod. He moved uncomfortably. She's got her grating. She doesn't know about Eglantine. She doesn't know about being seen. Well, said Pod, we'll tell her. We always said we would. There's no hurry. Homily stood up. Pod, she said, we're going to tell her. Now.